A warm welcome to all of our ISM members, chapter partners, and guests to today's program. Our speaker today is Renee Blanchard, who will be speaking on how to develop a plan for mitigating the risk of payment fraud. So please be sure to ask any questions by using the chat or the Q&A function. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, but if you do have a pertinent question, please pop it into the chat and we'll try to get through it at that time. The recording link for this presentation and the CEH will be emailed out a little later today. Now on to today's presentation. Renee Blanchard, Product Marketing at Corcentric. Renee has worked in software product development in the payments industry for over 15 years. She has experience in operations, product development, and management in business and technology solutions. Renee works with development teams to deliver customer-specific solutions. So at this time, I will be turning the program over to Renee.
Thank you, Kathy. All right. I am going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Can you see everything okay? I'm going to go ahead and go into presentation mode. All right. Thanks again, Kathy. So I'll go ahead here. What we're going to talk about today is developing a plan for mitigating the risk of payment fraud, like Kathy said. And here is some information about myself here, my email, and the details that Kathy had said about my work experience. So what we're going to talk about today, the agenda is talking just about payment fraud in general. What is payment fraud? We're going to talk about how to avoid payment fraud, the plan for mitigating payment fraud, and then how you can get started. And then, like Kathy said, we'll allow for questions and discussions at the end. So payment fraud. So B2B payments fraud frequently involves information manipulation. So bank account information on an invoice could be altered, basically just trying to redirect B2B payments into the wrong account. And this is a very real issue. As you can see here, we've just got some recent news stories, right? Former dance school comptroller pleads guilty to 1.5 million in fraud. It's very real. There's lots of money involved in payments fraud through lots of companies. And like I said, organizations of all sizes are vulnerable to payment fraud schemes. Here's another example here. $48,000 was stolen from a small business in Greece that fell victim to a business email compromise scam. And $700,000 was allegedly embezzled by a bookkeeper of a Missouri farm and trucking company. And then here, $800,000 worth of payroll payments were diverted to fraudsters' debit cards. So you can see that there's lots of fraud, payment fraud, and lots of money that's involved in that. Here you can see even larger amounts here. We've got $2 million worth of business loan was fraudulently obtained by a Hollywood CEO. We got $7.5 million worth of fraudulent B2B transactions were detected by Indiana law enforcement, and even 11 million, was paid by a meat supplier to ransomware attackers. So you can see this is a very real problem. And the ramifications of payment fraud, they extend way beyond the act of the hackers just getting the payment information. Once the fraud actually happens, the corporations continue to agonize with this for years. Once you're compromised, there's a lot of undoing that needs to happen in order to back out and recoup those funds. So what can you do to avoid payment fraud? There are three types, primary types of payment fraud. The first one is business email compromise attacks. The second one is account takeovers. The third one is supplier impersonation. And so the first one, the business email compromise, which is BEC, they occur when a fraudster gains access to the email system of a supplier and sends an email impersonating a supplier contact and asking to change the banking details. Then account takeovers are when a fraudster requests login credentials and gains access to a system where they can initiate bogus payments and steal account details. And then the last one of supplier impersonation, that occurs when fraudsters rely on publicly available information of legitimate suppliers to create fake accounts. And then they take the payments and deposit them into bank accounts that they own or in countries where it's difficult to recover. So if we talk about the business email compromise, these are getting harder to catch. And email is the easiest way for hackers to obtain access to sensitive information. So some of the things that you can look out for in business email compromises, you take a look to see, were you expecting the email from this individual? You want to make sure that you're not clicking on any links or going to any websites that could be fraudulent from email senders that you weren't expecting. You can take a look at the email to see, can you confirm that the domain name is legitimate? Is it spelled correctly? Sometimes, you'll receive an email from Citibank and it's missing one of the I's. It's easy to miss. But you just have to double check, make sure that the link is legitimate. Is the domain name? Another frequent thing that you'll see in these email attacks is misspellings, right? Or also, incorrect grammar, or, ways of speaking that aren't normal in the business world. And then, does the email prompt you to click on a link to view information? Likely, it'll click you into a link to a website that's not an actual valid website, but it looks like a valid website. And then you can enter your credentials to that website, and then they've captured that information. So let's see. So here you can see this is just kind of an example. It's something as simple as clicking on a link, and then it takes you to a page that's not a legitimate page. So here we go. This is some facts on payment fraud. So what we're seeing is that 63% of organizations say that BEC attacks are their primary source of payment fraud. It's a major form of attack. And then in 2020, they said 76% of organizations are experiencing BEC attacks. And then 34% of these organizations reported a financial loss as a result of an email scam. So here are the basics. When you agree to pay a supplier, you need to know your supplier. This is going to set you up for being able to set up a plan to mitigate that fraud. So, some of the basic information that you need to collect from your suppliers is data that you're going to use to perform, validations or verifications about that supplier. And we'll go into that a little bit later. But this is the basic information that you need to obtain from your suppliers. You need to get their supplier name, obviously, and then a supplier ID. You want to get their tax identification number so that you can verify that with the IRS. You need their address, their full address information, their phone number, and then you need a contact for payment processing. Who is it that you should reach out to when you're processing payments or when you're initiating payment or agreeing to make a payment. You need to know that contact and then their email. You also need to know their payment terms. What are their current payment terms? What is the currency that they want to receive their payments in? And then bank account details. So where do they bank? Where is their bank account located? What is the name of the company as it appears on their bank account? And then, of course, you'll need to know their routing number and their account number. So as we go through this presentation, we'll go ahead and talk to how we can validate all of that information. So moving on to the plan to mitigate payment fraud. So just like we said, we need to verify and validate the information that you're getting from the supplier. There's a lot of information from the supplier, and there's lots of different ways that you can do a validation or verification of those suppliers. You want to make sure that these are the suppliers that are supposed to be getting these payments that you're initiating. And so, one thing is a profile authorization form. And we'll go into details of these here in the slides following, but they're forms that that verify the information that they've provided when they've created their profiles or provided the information. You want to keep administrator details private. So when you determine who is the system administrator or the administrator on the supplier or for the supplier, you don't want to share that externally with anybody else. There's lots of things that fraudsters can do with that information to do payment fraud. We've got the U.S. Postal Service filter. We also have OFAC filter, so you can use that to validate as well. We've got corporate website scans if they've provided a website. And then we have a tax identification number matched with the IRS. And then sole proprietorship, so we can verify the sole proprietorships. And then we've got bank account prenote validation. So this is when we would verify that the bank account that they provided is a valid bank account. We maintain internal validation methods, and then we also do verbal validations here. So you also want to provide dual approval validation. And then the last thing that we'd want to do to verify and validate is inbound and outbound caller verification. So I'll go into these here on the next slides. We'll go ahead and go to each one of those in detail. So the first item that we have for validation is profile authorizations. So you need to have a process for documenting and tracking any vendor that maintains banking related information to confirm the legitimacy of the contact and payment credentials. You need to also require at least 2 signatures, one of which should be signed by a C-level officer or higher. So basically what we're doing here is we are verifying that the information that the supplier has provided is valid. And so one way that we can do that is we can provide a form to a C-level officer to verify that information. So we're verifying through a third party at that same company that the information provided by that individual is correct. This allows the officer to verify that they didn't add their own bank account details or another person's bank account details, that it actually belongs to the company. So this is a form that you can create to be able to verify that information. The next item that we talked about was the administrator details. We want to go ahead and keep those private. So what you want to do is we want to refrain from providing the name of the administrator that handles the payments. Because when you share the name of the person or the people who hold payment administrator privileges, it puts the account information at risk for unauthorized access. So if you're putting it out there that a certain individual is an administrator for an account, it's easier for a fraudster to obtain an email address, attempt to log into a profile using that user's email address, knowing that they're going to be a user on that application. So we definitely don't want to share who are administrators in the application. The next item that we have is the United States Postal Service address validation. So here you want to monitor and match the address information provided against records maintained by the U.S. Postal Service. And then you can also back that up with the GPS location registers. So there is a database that the United States Postal Service provides that you can use to bump the addresses that you receive from your suppliers up against. And you can do a couple of things with that. The first thing you can do is you can standardize the addresses, right? You can find whether there's duplicate suppliers in your master vendor file. And you can also just verify that the address that they provided actually belongs to that company and that they're not trying to, send maybe a check to a different address where they can take that check and deposit it into their bank account. So That's the US Postal Service address validation. The next item that we have for validating suppliers is the Office of Foreign Assets and Control. So what we would do here is you would complete external validation of every supplier on your network through the Office of Foreign Assets Control to check businesses and contact names against the internal banned blacklist or activities list. So just like the US Postal Service, the OFAC has a list, has a database that you can use to check any of the contacts that have been provided, so individuals, as well as companies, to see if they have been added to any of these blacklisted lists. So this is a red flag for you as well. Are you setting up a supplier that might be on one of these banned lists? The next item that we have is the website scan. So here, you're going to check website security certificates against display layouts. So if the web certificates or layouts do not match a typical site hosting parameters, you don't want to proceed with conducting additional due diligence here. So you're checking to make sure that the website that they provided, isn't a fraudulent website, maybe has securities or certificates that aren't valid, or may be used to capture credentials, like we talked about previously. The next item that we have here is the TIN and FEIN validation. So the TIN is the tax identification number of a company, and the FEIN is a federal employee identification number. And so you want to require all of your suppliers to provide these details and compare it against what's registered on file with the IRS. So just like the USPS and the OFAC, the IRS provides a database of all of the TINs where you could verify that the information that your supplier provided matches the TIN and the supplier name, which would also be a red flag if it doesn't match or if it's not correct. So the IRS will send you back confirmation if it is a match, or if it isn't a match, it can also provide you those details where you can follow back up with your supplier. So sole proprietorships, that's the next item here. We've got requiring federal documentation to validate that a supplier is a sole proprietorship. So you can do these in several places. You could get Secretary of State or entity documents. You can get articles of incorporation, and you can also get state and local or government business licenses. So these are information that you can also require from your suppliers to verify them. The next item that we have here on the list is prenote validation. And so here we want to complete a prenote validation for any and all new and updated banking credentials. And we'll verify that against treasury data to verify accounts can accept payments that correspond with a legitimate open bank account. So here what you would do is you would create a prenote payment to the bank account and routing number that was provided by your supplier, and that would allow the allow you to receive a verification back saying that yes, this bank account is valid and it can accept the payment, or no, the name isn't correct, the bank account isn't correct, maybe the routing number doesn't match. They can provide you with details back of why there might have been a failure, so that you can look into that as well. So another item here is to maintain internal validation methods. So what this is here is implement internal validation methods for suppliers that call or email, especially if they are requesting to update information urgently. So this is a really big one here, where if you have a supplier that calls in or emails, you want to be able to verify that that supplier works for the company that they're saying that they're working for. This is what we were talking about earlier, where a supplier might send an email saying, my bank account's updated, can you update my bank account? But they aren't actually with the company, right? They've compromised the email of the actual supplier, and they're trying to get you to update their bank account details so that you can send them a payment. And so here is where you might use information that's stored at their company to verify the information, like the last four of their tax ID number or some other information that only the company might know. So this is a big one here too. We also have verbal validations. So what we do here is you want to complete a verbal validation to ensure that all change requests are legitimate, pertaining to the company-owned payment credentials. So you don't change any of the payment details until a verbal confirmation can be made with a second party within the organization or someone other than the person making the request. So this kind of goes back to the previous slide where we're verifying information with the person calling. But what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, well, we've taken your request. We understand that you want to change your bank account details, but just like in the profile authorization form, we're going to make a second call out to the company to verify that the information that the supplier, the contact is trying to make is a valid change. So they're not trying to change the bank account of the company to their personal bank account. So we would verify with one or multiple people at the company through an independent verification, not saying, hey, can you transfer me to somebody else? We would reach out separately to make that phone call to try to get verification that that bank account is correct. The next item here is dual approval validation. So this is more of an internal control that you would use. So here, you would require two-party verification for any employee-assisted update made to payment information. So having a second person confirm the legitimacy of the change request, ensuring all the documentation has been received, and confirming that all applicable updates pass the validation before making the approval. So like I said, this is an internal control. If you have somebody at your company making changes to bank accounts on behalf of suppliers, so when the supplier emails in and says, hey, I need to make a change to my bank account, they go ahead and they do their additional verification. They call out to the company, but then additionally, you need to verify by another person at the company that the information that they're changing is correct. So it's a lot of validations upon validations, but it's important to make sure that you have these controls in place so payments aren't being hijacked. So. The next one here, the last one that we have on the list is the inbound and outbound caller verification. So just as a part of your standard business practice, you want to require suppliers to confirm their name and their business name, the last four of their tax ID number to receive assistance. So this keeps it so that, people aren't just calling in saying, hey, I work for this company. Can you provide me with some information about payments that I'm trying to get? We want to make sure before we give any information about a supplier or their payments or their bank account details that we're sure that we're talking to somebody at that company. So that's another important step. All right, so getting started. So the first thing that you want to do in order to get started with these mitigation tasks is to have cross-functional alignment. So it's important that you have team members across the organization who are willing to put in the time and to put in the strategies and the tasks in order to prevent payment fraud. And what you want to do first is you want to recognize and understand each stakeholder's disparate perspectives on fraud mitigation. And then you want to also consider how fraud strategy will impact the supplier's journey. So, as you can see, all of those steps do help prevent fraud, but how does that affect or impact the supplier when they're trying to be onboarded or when they're trying to change, information in their account? You don't want to make it cumbersome, but you need to, find a way that is the least impactful on your supplier without opening yourself up to that fraud. And then number 3 here, you want to develop a framework that quantifies how fraud currently impacts the organization. You want to see how you're open to it right now. And then you want to agree on an approach to fraud mitigation that balances the need for security with growth. So The last thing we have here is defining a path forward to ensure the strategy evolves with the changing organizational needs. So fraudsters are constantly changing their approaches. They're getting smarter. They're getting more sophisticated. So, just making sure that you're able to grow with those needs. So again, you want to agree internally to these measures, right? So what is it out of these that you can start with? Each of these on their own may not be enough to prevent fraud, but it's better than doing nothing. And every item, every task that you add onto your processes to mitigate risk is just strengthening your measures, right? So it's just strengthening your efforts to prevent to prevent payment fraud. So each of these individually is nice, but the more that you can add, or if you can do all of these, it makes it even stronger. So what do you want to look out for as red flags for payment fraud? You want to look out for odd requests from your suppliers. So, one thing that suppliers do, that fraudsters do, is they talk about the emergency of their request. This has to be happen now. I have to have this payment right now. We just got a new bank account. This information has to go out. I need this payment today. That sense of urgency really lowers people's threshold for being safe. And so you don't want to reply to emails requesting financial information, or like we said previously, you don't want to click on any links from unknown senders. And then you want to confirm by phone, in person, any request to change a supplier or a customer's account number or financial information. And then you also want to look, were you expecting this email from somebody? And then confirming the domain name. So we talked about that previously too. Is the domain that the email is coming from, is that legitimate, or the link that they're asking you to click on? And then again, if there's any misspellings in the email or incorrect grammar. So you want to look out for all of these in your emails and in requests. So the next item here is you want to protect and train your employees. So you want to manage the risk of employees committing fraud or falling victim to scams by using the best practices of separating employee duties and adding dual approval to execute large transactions. So, if there is a large transaction, you can decide what that threshold might be, that in order for you to make that payment, you may need multiple approvals for that to go out. You want to have periodic independent audits of finances and key business processes. And then you want to make sure that you have employee training to familiarize them with fraud risks and how to spot scams. So, doing this throughout the year, or, there's lots of online trainings that help you go through different types of information that would let your employees know, what to look out for, what not to do in order to prevent fraud. And then you also want to remind your employees of general best practices. You want to make sure that they're using strong passwords and that they're changing them regularly, and if possible, making it mandatory that they're doing that. So one other thing that you can do is to try to move to electronic payment types. So a lot of the fraud is occurring on check payments. So what you want to do is you can mitigate some of that fraud by moving over to electronic payments. But moving to electronic payments is a pretty big feat. A lot of companies, don't have the resources or the time to do it. Here you can see, even just by the numbers, that 74% of companies report challenges in converting suppliers to electronic payments. And then, like I said, 71% of companies say there's a shortage of IT resources to implement those changes. They have 70% of companies indicate a lack of standard for remittance information. So, after you send an electronic payment, you also have to send the remittance information for what that payment is for, which invoices, any discounts, like the check stub would be. But there's no way for them to deliver that information with an electronic payment. 66% of companies say there's a lack of effective integration between electronic payments, and their accounting system. So it is tough. There's a lot of work involved with moving to electronic payments, but it is another way to mitigate payment fraud. So like we said here, moving to electronic payment types, you can see that 63% of organizations are still making more than half of their payments by check. But 2 out of 3 financial professionals would convert to electronic payments if there was a cost benefit analysis. And then just on the cost side of it, ACH versus checks, you can see that checks are 10 times more costly than virtual card payments or ACH. So that's everything. Hopefully I didn't go too fast, but if anybody has any questions or want to discuss anything, I'd be happy to discuss or answer any questions.
Okay, we're just waiting to see if any questions will be coming in the chat from our audience. So do you have like any resources that we could mention?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have an issue? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So we do have a white paper that has all of these statistics that we've provided. So I can, Kathy, I can reach out to you with the white paper, and then you can get that distributed.
Definitely. Okay, thank you so much. We did get one question in. How would I get access to the OFAC and the IRS databases?
Oh yeah, that's a good question too. So so for the IRS databases, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. I know if you have an account with the IRS, so you can just set up an account with the IRS for your company. And what you can do is they have the ability for you to upload files. So you would basically just take the details from your ERP system or your accounting system. You would take your company name and the TIN or the FEIN, and in a file you can upload that into the IRS website, and the IRS will then will scan that against their database, and then they will provide you a file back with a reference key that says, you know, for this file that you sent us, here's the results. You know, this was a match, this was not a match. You know, this company name doesn't exist. You know, there's lots of different results that you get, but it's just by having an IRS account on the IRS website. And that's the same with the OFAC scans. So, you know, you can do that through third parties. There's third-party services that offer that, where you can upload files, or you can even have API connections to those third parties, where you just send the data and then they scan against the OFAC list, and then they provide you with results.
Okay, we got another question in. What steps do you take once you determine that your company made a fraudulent payment, a large one?
Yes. Okay, that's a good question. So there's lots of steps you can take. I think the first thing that you want to do is obviously stop the payment. If it's a check payment that you made, you can do a stop payment, a cancellation of that check. Or if it's an ACH payment, you can also do a block on that payment. So you can actually recall those funds. Typically after 5 days, it's too late, but the automated clearinghouse allows you to recall funds on an ACH payment for 5 days. So that's something that you can do. And I know, you know, if it's a very large one, sometimes you have to get the FBI involved. There's a lot that goes into you know, following up, because they could actually block those payments as well. So,
okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. Oh, wait a minute, something just came in. So let me just look and see what that one is. Okay, are there tips for mitigating payment fraud with foreign suppliers entities?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I have any information on that right now. We do mostly US entities on our side here. So I think I can look into that and provide you some information though.
Okay, thank you. I'll make sure Jim gets that information, and if anybody else is interested, get that information to them as well. Jim says thank you. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see. Yes, actually, quite a few people are saying that would be very helpful because I'm sure a lot of people have global suppliers. Another question, you mentioned contacting FBI to report a fraud. Do you also alert the state authorities?
Yes, you can. Yeah, you should. You should alert the state authorities. I think you would alert the state where your bank is located, and also in the state where the fraud occurred. So if that's something that you have available to you, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Do you have any last closing remarks that you want to share with the audience before we end for today?
Yeah, I guess I would just say, just start with something, get alignment throughout your company and start with something, right? I mean, just putting one of these mitigation steps can help go a long way. Just starting with one step and making it a standard process, across your organization, and then adding additional ones. I mean, there's some things here that you don't need much resources, I guess, in order to implement. And so, as you build your arsenal of mitigation tasks, it just gets stronger and stronger. So, just start with something, or you could partner with a company that already does this. There's lots of companies out there that perform these validations on your behalf. So that's always an option too. But it's important making sure. Fraud's a real issue, and it's happening before you know it.
Yeah, definitely. Too much of it
Yes,
lately, that's for sure. One question, not a question, but a thought. Also interested in foreign entity validation information. Do you have any of that you can share with the audience, or maybe share in a document?
Yeah, I can look into getting that information. I think that was the information for the foreign entities.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So we'll get that out to everybody that's attending today. Just give us a couple of days, and I'll be sending out a separate email on that for that. If we have any other closing questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll definitely get in there and get it answered for you. We're getting a lot of thank yous. We appreciate you attending today. As I said, we will send out the recording of this in case you want to share it with your colleagues. And we will also be sending out your continuing educational credit as well. And then as soon as I receive the other information from Renee, we'll get that out to you as well. Okay, so at this point, I'm just going to mention our next program at this point. First of all, I want to say a big thank you to Renee for bringing this informative, important information to our ISM community. And we will be, our next program is going to be next week on the 16th. And we're going to be talking about the Ukraine war and how it's affecting our supply chain. So at this point, I'd like to say, everybody have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thanks again, Renee.
Thanks, everyone.